Chapter 1 Extra Credits. Roger Green liked systems that made sense. Not because life had to be orderly, he wasn't that naive, but because when something did follow rules it deserved appreciation. Code compiled or it didn't. Circuits worked or they didn't. An input produced an output, and if it didn't, you traced the problem, fixed it, and moved on. People, on the other hand, were inconsistent by design. That was fine. Roger didn't resent that about them. He simply didn't build his life around expectations that rarely held. At 34, Roger occupied a comfortable equilibrium. He worked full-time as a programmer for a mid-sized logistics software company. Stable, remote-friendly, and mercifully light on meetings that could have been emails. In the evenings and on weekends, he focused on his indie software projects. Small utilities, experimental tools, things that scratched an itch no existing product quite reached. It paid modestly in money and generously in satisfaction. And beneath his house, quite literally beneath everything else, was his real passion. The basement had once been unfinished concrete and exposed piping, the kind of space that existed to store boxes you hoped you'd never open again. Roger had stripped it bare 2 years earlier and rebuilt it from the ground up. Black painted ceiling, neon accent strips lining the walls, checkerboard vinyl flooring that glowed faintly under ultraviolet light. Along one wall stood 7 arcade machines, each restored by hand. Space Invaders came first. Yellowed side panels, resoldered boards, a monitor coaxed gently back to life. Centipede followed, bright, weird, historically important in a way Roger liked mentioning to anyone who asked. Pac-Man needed no justification. Tron Pinball anchored the corner, its back glass pulsing with blue circuitry. Dragon's Lair sat slightly apart. Its cabinet was pristine, the artwork impossibly earnest in that early 80s way. Dirk the Daring frozen mid-pose. The Laserdisc drive waited patiently behind the panel, its circuit board laid out on Roger's workbench like an open chest cavity. The damage itself was not dramatic. A burned trace here, aged components there. Easy enough once he set aside the time. Time, unfortunately, was a finite resource. Roger stood at the basement steps one Monday afternoon, holding his phone to his ear, listening as his older sister spoke at a speed that suggested both stress and the hope that he would interrupt her with an immediate yes. "We wouldn't ask if we had other options," she said. "It's just for the week." Roger leaned his hip against the wall and stared down into the arcade. The jukebox lights cycled idly through reds and blues, playing nothing. "A week is fine," he said. "What's up?" She exhaled. "It's complicated. Mark's mother, hospital things, travel. Listen, I know it's a lot. I like Evan," Roger said calmly. "You know that." "I do," she said, relief leaking into her voice. "He does too. He'll probably want to show you his latest game ideas." Roger smiled despite himself. Evan was 12, clever, and at the precise age where curiosity bloomed faster than self-doubt. The kid had already discovered loops, conditionals, and the deep joy of making something small work. "Tell him I've got the good snacks," Roger said. "Roger, it's covered," he said. "Pick a drop-off time." By Tuesday morning, Evan had settled into the guest room upstairs and the rhythm of shared breakfasts and mutual respect. Roger worked. Evan read, coded, and watched videos with the volume kept to a promised minimum. In the afternoons, they descended into the basement together. Evan gravitated immediately to Centipede, then Pac-Man, then Tron Pinball. Roger watched from a stool near his workbench, offering occasional comments that were half technical and half encouragement. On the second day, Evan hovered near the stairs after lunch, rocking slightly on his heels. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You just did," Roger replied. Evan grinned. "Okay, can I ask you another thing?" "Proceed. Could I invite Sam over? And maybe Leo? Just to play games?" Roger considered it. Not the request, games were meant to be played, but the outcome. Noise, movement, human variables introduced into a carefully balanced system. Then he shrugged. "Sure," he said. Arcades were loud. It's historically accurate. By Wednesday afternoon, 3 kids became 6. 6 became 10. They spilled into the basement with the chaotic precision of summer boredom, marveling aloud at the cabinets, challenging each other, taking turns. Roger relocated Dragon's Lair's open components to a safer shelf and made a mental note to reorganize later. He didn't mind. He told himself that more than once. Still, when Evan bounded up the stairs early Thursday morning with a light in his eyes that telegraphed trouble dressed as enthusiasm, Roger braced. "What if we did a tournament?" Evan said. Roger paused mid-coffee sip. "Define tournament." "Multiple games," Evan said quickly. "Scores added together. Winner gets bragging rights." "And the risk assessment?" Roger asked. Evan blinked. Roger set down his mug. "We'd need permission. Parental consent. Clear rules." Evan's face fell, then snapped back into focus as the challenge registered. "Could we do that?" Roger felt something shift. Yes, it would be work. Yes, it would disrupt his schedule. But the idea had weight, structure, purpose. "We could," Roger said slowly. By that evening, Roger had printed permission slips, complete with a simple explanation, a date, and a line for emergency contact numbers. He watched Evan distribute them like currency. As the responses trickled back, typed names, handwritten phone numbers, Roger's mind began iterating. What if it wasn't just a tournament? What if it was bigger? The thought arrived fully formed and refused to leave. By nightfall, Roger stood in his garage, mentally measuring floor space. 5 cabinets could fit comfortably. Spectators could line the walls. The grill could move to the front yard. Coolers were easy. Tickets could be simple. Kids manned the table, money collected, proceeds split evenly. Everyone wins something. He'd need a trophy. Would. Simple. Honest. By the time he returned inside, Roger realized something else had happened. Without noticing, he had stepped outside his carefully bounded life. And every system he trusted told him that once you open a loop like that, you don't get to pretend it never ran. Chapter 2 Player 2 joins. By Friday morning, Roger's garage had become a math problem with a heartbeat. He stood in the center of it, hands on hips, mentally sliding rectangles across the concrete floor. 5 arcade cabinets, clearance for extension cords, viewing lanes that wouldn't turn into bottlenecks. The garage door itself would have to stay open, too much heat otherwise, which introduced weather into the equation. Wind direction, sun glare, the unpredictable behavior of children given downtime and sugar. Roger loved constraints. He just preferred them technological. Evan hovered near the doorway, holding a clipboard Roger had laminated with excessive seriousness. We've got 7 permission slips back already, he said. All with phone numbers. 7 confirmed, Roger corrected. And how many maybes? 2, Evan said. But Sam's mom said, probably, in a text with a thumbs up emoji. Roger squinted. That's an unreliable data format. Evan grinned. So, yes, provisional, Roger said. Have her sign the paper. They moved the Space Invaders cabinet first. It took careful tilting, a furniture dolly, and language Roger did not use professionally. When it finally settled against the garage wall, Evan clapped like they'd completed a quest objective. For more, Evan said. They were halfway through relocating Pac-Man when Roger noticed someone standing at the end of his driveway. She hadn't rung the bell. She hadn't stepped onto the property. She stood with her arms crossed, weight on one hip, observing the open garage like someone determining whether the situation was a nuisance or a liability. Roger straightened. She wore jeans, a blue t-shirt with a local library logo, and an expression tuned to skepticism. Her hair was pulled back messily, like she'd decided effort was negotiable today. She raised a hand, not a wave, a signal. Hi, she called. Is this an arcade? Evan beamed. Yes. Roger shot him a look, then addressed the woman. It is temporarily, he said. For a community tournament. Her eyebrow lifted. Of course it is. Roger felt a familiar tightening, the one that preceded a misunderstanding he hadn't budgeted time for. Can I help you? I'm Claire Morales, she said, stepping closer but still respecting the invisible boundary of the driveway. I live 2 houses down. I'm also the unofficial herder of neighborhood chaos. Evan leaned in. She means she runs the block group chat. Claire pointed at him without looking away from Roger. And you must be Evan. You left your lunchbox at my place yesterday. Evan's ears reddened. Oh, right. Roger connected the dots. Neighborhood adult. Context seeker. Potential source of friction. I wanted to ask, Claire continued, before this turned into something bigger than anyone planned. Are you aware that half the kids on the street think you've opened a time portal? Roger blinked. I am now. She exhaled, glancing at the cabinets. Her tone softened despite herself. Look, it's impressive, and I'm not here to shut anything down. I just need to know what's going on, so I can give parents accurate information. Roger nodded. That was reasonable. He liked reasonable. There's a tournament tomorrow, he said. Permission required. Supervised. Tickets are for spectators only. Proceeds split among participants. Claire studied him for a beat longer, then smiled faintly. You printed permission slips. Yes, of course you did. It wasn't mocking. If anything, it sounded relieved. She stepped into the garage now, eyes scanning the machines with interest she tried not to show. My brother had a Pac-Man cabinet growing up, she said. It was always broken. They usually are, Roger said. Until they aren't. She looked at him then, really looked, and something in her expression shifted. Curiosity edged out caution. Well, she said, I'll spread the word, and I'll be here tomorrow. Just in case. Just in case of? Roger prompted. Anything, she said cheerfully. I'm good at anything. She turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Roger? Yes. My kids are ruthless. Consider this your warning. The driveway felt quieter after she left. Evan whispered, I think she likes the Tron 1. Roger pretended not to hear that. The rest of the day accelerated. Parents stopped by to drop off signed forms and ask questions. Roger answered calmly, methodically, fielding concerns about noise levels, supervision, and fairness. He never once mentioned the unpaid hours of planning or the fact that this was all happening because he said yes to a 12-year-old with optimism. By evening, the final count stood at 11 participants. He drove to the hardware store and bought a pre-cut oak plank, sandpaper, and wood stain. In his head, the trophy took shape: 3 etched plaques, simple lettering. No superlatives. Just names and positions. At home, he worked late into the night, the smell of stain mixing with solder and old electronics. Dragon's Lair watched silently from the corner, unfinished, patient. Saturday arrived warm and cloudless. The garage filled quickly. Kids clustered around the cabinets while parents lingered near the driveway, coffee cups in hand. Evan and 2 others manned the ticket table with gravity, wielding a cash box like it might bite. Roger grilled. Burgers sizzled. Someone laughed loudly. The world intruded. Claire arrived with a clipboard of her own. "You're punctual," she observed. "So are you," Roger replied. They fell into an odd rhythm, her intercepting questions before they reached him solving minor crises as they emerged. A jammed coin slot, a near argument about turn order, a sudden realization that ice melts. "Pac-Man finals are in 10, Evan announced. Claire leaned over the score sheet. "Combined totals," she murmured. "That's clever." "It discourages specialization," Roger said automatically. She smiled. "You really thought this through." The finals ended in cheers. The trophy presentation drew applause. Roger crouched to read the names etched into the wood, calling them out clearly. When it was over, the kids dispersed with sticky fingers and wide smiles. Parents lingered to say thank you. Someone clapped Roger on the shoulder with casual gratitude that caught him off guard. As the sun dipped, the garage emptied. Claire stayed. She helped stack chairs without being asked, then leaned against the workbench. "You didn't have to do all this," she said quietly. "I know," Roger replied. She nodded. Still, there was a pause. Comfortable. Surprising. "So," she said, "your arcade, does it ever open to the public?" Roger laughed. "Unlikely." "Shame," she said. "Community could use more places like it." He looked at the open garage, then at the cabinets waiting to be moved back downstairs. Maybe some systems wanted expansion, and maybe he was just beginning to consider the upgrade. Chapter 3: High Scores and Soft Launches. The day after the tournament felt like a house after guests leave. Quiet in a way that made every small sound suspicious. Roger carried the last empty cooler back into the garage and set it beside the wall, then stood there longer than necessary. The cabinets waited, inert and obedient, like they were pretending nothing unusual had happened. The concrete still bore faint scuffs where folding chairs had been dragged, ghost evidence of an event that felt both substantial and oddly unreal. Evan slurped cereal at the kitchen table, flipping through photos on his phone. "Sam texted me," he said. "He says his dad wants an arcade night for grown-ups." Roger winced mildly. "We are not franchising. Yet," Evan said, entirely too hopeful. Roger ignored that and focused on sliding Centipede back onto the dolly. The weight felt different going down the basement steps. Heavier somehow, as if gravity itself had opinions about returning things to normal. By mid-afternoon, the arcade looked right again. Familiar. Contained. Roger powered on each cabinet in sequence, listening for misfires, watching for lag. Everything behaved. Dragon's Lair did not. The board refused to initialize, the diagnostic LED blinking an accusatory pattern. Roger sighed and crouched, screwdriver in hand. "You're sulking," Evan observed from the stool near the workbench. "I don't sulk," Roger said. "I troubleshoot." Evan swung his legs. "The tournament was fun." "It was," Roger agreed. "You should do another." "That remains statistically unlikely." Evan frowned thoughtfully. "Claire says people liked it." Roger looked up. "You talked to Claire?" "She lives near us," Evan said. "And she said to thank you again." Roger returned his attention to the board. "You're welcome." The words felt inadequate once spoken. Evan's parents returned that evening with gratitude and baked goods, and by nightfall Roger found himself alone again. He stood at the foot of the basement stairs. Lights off, arcade dark. For the first time, the silence felt too clean. On Tuesday, there was a knock at his door. Roger opened it to find Claire holding a reusable grocery bag, her expression somewhere between purposeful and amused. "I come bearing a peace offering," she said, lifting the bag. He stepped aside. "You didn't have to." "I know," she said, walking in. "I wanted to." She pulled out a loaf of bread, still warm, and set it on the counter. "Thank you, carbs. It's a cultural thing." Roger inhaled. "Sourdough." "Obviously." They stood there, an awkward beat stretching until Claire glanced past him. "Is the arcade gone?" "No," Roger said quickly. "Just downstairs." Her smile returned. "Good." They carried mugs to the table. Claire wrapped her hands around hers, studying him over the rim. "You okay after Saturday?" "Yes," Roger said. Then, after a moment, "Yes, but tired." She nodded. "That's usually how it works." They talked logistics at first, cleanup, follow-up, the even split of ticket money. Claire mentioned 3 parents who'd already asked about future events. Roger pinched the bridge of his nose. "I have a job." "You organized all that with spreadsheets and laminated clipboards?" she said gently. You also enjoyed it. He opened his mouth to object, then stopped. She smiled, soft and unassuming. You don't have to become the neighborhood arcade guy. I don't want to, he said. Good, she said. But you also don't have to disappear. Something in that landed with unexpected weight. You should see Dragon's Lair, he said abruptly. Her eyes lit. Lead the way. The basement flickered to life, neon washing over her like a time machine. Claire slowed, turning slowly, taking it all in. Oh, she breathed. This is curated. I restored almost everything myself, Roger said. The Dragon's Lair boards being stubborn. She knelt beside him without hesitation, peering at the exposed components. What's wrong with it? He explained, careful not to oversimplify. She listened, really listened, asking questions that made him reconsider assumptions he hadn't revisited in years. So you've tried replacing the capacitor? She asked. Yes. And it still fails at power-up? Yes. She tilted her head. What if it's not the power path? What if it's the timing between systems? Roger froze. Slowly, he smiled. They worked side by side until evening darkened the windows. When the board finally chimed to life, Dirk swinging his sword on screen, Claire laughed like they'd won something. See? She said. Team effort. Roger felt an unfamiliar warmth. Not excitement. Not nerves. Possibility. They stood there, listening to the hum of a restored machine, and Roger realized the arcade no longer felt like a retreat. Felt like an invitation. Chapter 4, Debug Mode. The trouble with a successful system was that people assumed it wanted to scale. Roger learned this on Monday morning when his inbox contained 14 emails from addresses he did not recognize, all variations on the same theme. Had such a great time, the kids are still talking about it. Would you consider doing another one? He stared at the screen, coffee cooling beside him, and resisted the urge to categorize the messages into folders. He already knew the bins: gratitude, curiosity, expectation. Expectation was the dangerous one. Downstairs, the arcade hummed in its usual, reassuring way. Dragon's Lair ran smoothly now, Dirk leaping and falling with cinematic enthusiasm. The system was fixed, the issue resolved. Roger wished his internal state were as debuggable. He replied carefully, polite thanks, non-committal phrasing, the repeated use of experiment and one-time event. He closed the laptop with relief and resolved to lose himself in code for the rest of the day. The doorbell rang at 11:30. Roger opened it to find Claire again, this time with a cardboard box balanced on her hip. I promise I'm not stalking you, she said immediately. That would depend on the contents of the box, Roger replied. She smiled. Surveys. He laughed despite himself and stepped aside. Of course they are. They spread the papers across the dining table. Feedback forms, short, handwritten, some decorated with stars and pixelated doodles. Most of the parents asked me to compile them, Claire said, because apparently I've been unofficially promoted to neighborhood administrator. And you accepted. It was that or watch them argue in the group chat, she said. I chose the path of lesser madness. Roger skimmed a few sheets. Best day of summer so far. Can we play again? Tell the arcade guy he's awesome. He swallowed. This is generous. It is, Claire said gently. And overwhelming. Yes, Roger said, grateful she'd named it. Very. They sat in companionable silence for a moment. Claire broke it first. I wanted to be clear. I'm not here to pressure you. I just thought you should see what it meant to people. He nodded slowly. I appreciate that. She leaned back in her chair, studying him. You're not used to being at the center of things, are you? Roger considered denying it. Instead, he shrugged. I build systems that work best when they're invisible. And yet, she said, gesturing vaguely, you built something very visible. That wasn't the intent, he said. No, she agreed. But intent and outcome don't always align. The sentence lodged somewhere deep. Later that afternoon, they moved downstairs together. Claire, perched on the arm of a couch Roger had restored more for ambience than comfort, watching him fine-tune the Dragon's Lair cabinet. You ever think about making this a real thing? She asked. Not a business, just open days. Roger tightened a bolt. I think about how much effort it would take. She smiled. You always answer the question behind the question. He met her gaze. And you ask the ones people avoid. They shared a look that lingered just a second too long. The moment broke when Evan texted from school. Can I come over after? And Roger nodded to the board lighting perfectly as if on cue. That evening, as they stood at the top of the basement stairs, Claire hesitated. I should go, she said. I have early meetings. Right? Roger said. Of course. Then, before he could stop himself, would you want to? She paused, hopeful, and his words tangled. Help me plan something smaller? He finished. If, in the future. Claire's smile was bright but measured. I'd like that. She stepped closer, then stopped, respecting his space even now. You know, she said, not everything has to be optimized to be worth doing. Roger nodded. I'm starting to see that. When she left, the house felt different again. Not quiet this time, but charged, like a program left running in the background. Roger returned to the basement and powered up Dragon's Lair one more time. Dirk leapt. The screen glowed. For the first time in a long while, Roger didn't immediately look for what might break next. He just watched the game play out. Chapter 5, Crash to Desktop. The problem with Momentum was that it didn't announce when it stopped working. Roger discovered this on Thursday evening, 3 days after Claire's visit, when his carefully partitioned life began throwing errors he hadn't anticipated. His workday stretched on past normal hours, a release deadline creeping closer with the petulance of unfinished business. Dragon's Lair glitched once, just a flicker, barely perceptible, but it set his teeth on edge. He rebooted it twice. Still, the feeling persisted. A low-grade hum of unease, like a background process consuming resources without permission. Upstairs, the phone buzzed. Roger checked it reflexively, then frowned at himself. It was Evan. "Can I come over Saturday?" Mom said yes. Roger stared at the message longer than necessary. Saturday was empty on his calendar, a rare occurrence. He typed sure and sent it before he could consider contingencies. Downstairs, the arcade lights cycled through their idle patterns. Roger leaned on the workbench, breathing in the familiar scent of electronics and wood stain. He'd always trusted this space to restore equilibrium. But equilibrium, he was realizing, had shifted. The next evening, Claire texted. "Heads up, some parents are asking if the arcade is open this weekend. I told them no official events. Just wanted you to know." Roger's thumbs hovered, then typed back. "Thanks. Appreciate the boundary setting." "Of course," she replied. "How are you doing?" He considered honesty, measured it against habit. "Busy," he wrote. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. "If you want help with anything," she sent, "I'm around." He set the phone down without replying. Not avoidance, triage. He needed to think. Saturday arrived faster than expected, bringing Evan and 2 neighborhood kids in tow. Roger supervised games, explained scoring quirks, fixed a sticky button on Pac-Man. The kids laughed. The system worked. Yet Roger felt oddly detached, like an administrator overseeing a server he no longer fully recognized. Claire didn't stop by. He told himself that was fine. Sunday morning was quiet, the kind of quiet that invited reflection whether you wanted it or not. Roger found himself sanding the edge of the oak trophy plank. Unnecessary, already smooth, but his hands needed something to do. The doorbell rang. Claire stood outside, hair damp from rain that hadn't been forecast, a tote bag slung over her shoulder. Her expression was unreadable. "I'm sorry," she said preemptively. "I should have texted." "No," Roger said, stepping aside. "It's okay." She entered, eyes flicking briefly toward the basement stairs. "I won't stay long." They stood in the kitchen, the familiar awkwardness back but sharpened. "I got a message," she said carefully, "from one of the parents. They assumed I was co-organizing now." Roger's shoulders tightened. "You're not." "I know," she said, "but they're reading proximity as permission." He nodded. "That's my fault." She softened. "It's not about fault. It's about expectation. And whether you want to carry it." Silence stretched. "I don't," Roger said finally. The words came out heavier than he'd expected. "I liked doing the event. I didn't like what followed." Claire studied him, eyes kind but unflinching. "You don't owe anyone access to your life because they enjoyed a moment in it." Relief loosened something in him. "Thank you." She hesitated. "But I need to ask something." "Okay. Are you pulling back because you're overwhelmed?" she said. "Or because you're scared of what changes if you don't?" The question landed cleanly. No accusation, just data. Roger exhaled slowly. "Both." She nodded. "That tracks." They walked downstairs together, arcade lights blinking awake. Claire rested a hand on the Tron cabinet, grounding herself. "I like this place," she said. "And I like you. But I don't want to be another demand on your bandwidth." Roger swallowed. "You're not. But you're treating me like I might be," she said gently. He met her gaze. "I don't know how to integrate something I didn't plan for." "That doesn't make it an error," she said. "Just untested code." He laughed quietly. "You're very comfortable with my metaphors." "I work with systems too," she said. "Just Messier ones." They stood there, the hum of machines filling the space between them. "I don't want to disappear," he said at last. "I just need to control the scope." Claire smiled, small but genuine. "That I can respect." She stepped closer, not quite bridging the gap. "So, slow build, clear boundaries, honest check-ins." Roger nodded. "Version control." "Exactly." When she left, the silence that followed felt different. Not empty, not charged. Stable. Roger returned to Dragon's Lair and powered it on. The intro played flawlessly, Dirk charging forward, fearless and ridiculous. Roger watched, then smiled. Crashes happened. Systems recovered. And sometimes a reset wasn't failure, it was progress. Chapter 6. Continue? 10-9-8. The thing about a countdown was that it demanded an answer. You could step away, sure. Let the numbers fall into silence. but anyone who'd ever stood in an arcade long enough knew what the pause really meant. The game wasn't over yet. It was waiting. Roger discovered this midway through the following week, standing in the grocery store aisle with a cart containing exactly the items on his list and one pack of novelty joystick-shaped lollipops he did not remember deciding to purchase. He stared at the candy for a long moment, then sighed and left it in the cart. This apparently was happening. Work calmed down in predictable spurts, deadlines behaving once properly negotiated. Evenings returned to a shape Roger recognized. Hours in the basement tweaking code, tightening screws, tracing logic paths. Dragon's Lair ran perfectly. The arcade felt balanced again. Yet every so often, Roger caught himself checking his phone for no strictly practical reason. On Thursday night, he found the countdown again. It began as a draft email. "Hey Claire," he typed. He stopped, deleted it, rewrote. "I've been thinking about what you said." That felt vague. He set the laptop aside, leaned back in his chair, and stared at the ceiling of his office. Neon light from the basement traced faint color up the stairwell. Claire had given him space. Real space, not the strained politeness of someone waiting to be invited back in. That, more than anything, made the decision harder and easier. If he reached out, it would be because he wanted to, not because momentum pushed him. Roger opened his laptop again. "Do you have time this weekend?" No agenda. "Just coffee?" He reread it twice, then hit send before he could optimize it into meaninglessness. The reply came an hour later. "I do. And I like no agenda. Saturday?" He smiled, small and genuine, and typed "Saturday works." Saturday arrived bright but unremarkable in every way except the one that mattered. Roger chose clothes with care that bordered on indifference. Clean jeans, a soft t-shirt. He almost changed twice, then stopped himself. This wasn't a pitch. It didn't need polish. Claire met him at a cafe 3 blocks from her house, the kind of place that smelled like espresso and intention. She smiled when she saw him, immediate and unguarded. "Hey," she said. "Hey," he replied. They ordered drinks, then sat by the window. For a moment, neither rushed to fill the space. "I'm glad you texted," Claire said finally. "So am I," Roger said. "I needed to choose it." She nodded, understanding more than he'd explained. "I'm trying something new too." "Dangerous," Roger observed. "Terrifying," she agreed. "But worth it." They talked easily, about books, work, the odd intensity of neighborhood politics in otherwise quiet streets. Roger told her about his indie software project, the one he'd shelved for months. Claire admitted she'd quietly taken on too much responsibility for people who didn't always meet her halfway. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I don't think you're afraid of people." "No," Roger said. "Just of open systems." She smiled. "Lucky for you, relationships come with pretty flexible APIs." He laughed, the tension easing from his shoulders as if he'd finally pressed the right key. After coffee, they walked. Not anywhere particular. Down streets Roger had driven 100 times but rarely noticed. The conversation slowed, not awkwardly, but comfortably. At his driveway, they stopped. "I'm not inviting myself in," Claire said. "Just to be clear." Roger smiled. "I know." He hesitated, then said, "Would you want to? Next time?" She met his eyes. Yes. The answer was simple, uncomplicated, real. That evening, Roger returned to the basement and powered up Dragon's Lair. The countdown appeared briefly on screen, then the game launched forward. No hesitation, no pause. Roger leaned back and watched Dirk charge ahead, reckless and committed. "Okay," Roger murmured, not to the game but to himself. He picked up the controller and pressed continue. Chapter 7, Co-op Campaign. Building something together turned out to be quieter than Roger expected. No announcements, no group texts, no clipboards or permission slips, just a steady accumulation of small decisions that leaned forward instead of retreating. It began with Claire stopping by on a Wednesday evening with a bag of takeout and an idea she framed carefully, like she was setting a fragile object on a table. "I told a teacher friend about the arcade," she said. "Middle school, after school program." She asked if I knew anyone who could talk about games, how they're made, not just played. Roger unwrapped a container absently. "You said no." "I said I knew someone who might be interested," Claire replied, watching him. No commitment, just curiosity. He considered it. Not the logistics, those were manageable, but the exposure. Standing in front of kids who weren't already impressed by blinking lights. Explaining logic aloud. Letting a hobby be seen as more than a refuge. "When?" he asked. "Next month," she said. "Plenty of time." He nodded once. "Okay." That was how it went. One yes at a time. They met twice a week after that. Sometimes at his place, sometimes for walks that turned into long conversations. They learned each other's rhythms without making a point of it. Roger discovered that Claire planned with intuition first and list second. Claire learned that Roger thought better when his hands were busy. One night, while he replaced a worn joystick spring, she sat cross-legged on the floor beside him, sketching on a notepad. "What's that?" he asked. She flipped it around. It was a loose diagram of his basement, machines labeled, arrows pointing between them. At the center, a wide open space. I was thinking about flow, she said. Not for crowds, for learning. He studied it. That could work. I know. They smiled at each other. A shared satisfaction blooming that felt distinctly cooperative. Not romantic exactly, but threaded with something warmer than friendship. On Saturday, Evan came over again, bringing a laptop and the kind of seriousness that suggested he wanted to be useful. I heard there's a programming thing, he said, glancing between them. If you need testers. Claire crouched to his level. Would you like to help us design something? Evan's eyes went wide. Yes. They spent the afternoon in a loose sprawl of activity. Evan prototyped a basic maze game while Roger offered guidance sparingly, careful not to take over. Claire documented, asked questions, reframed concepts in language that landed. At one point, Roger stepped back and watched them. Claire explaining collision detection with hand gestures, Evan nodding furiously, typing too fast. The sight struck him harder than expected. This wasn't chaos. This was alignment. Later, as the sun dipped low and Evan packed up, Claire lingered in the doorway. You're good at this, she said. Roger shrugged. I like helping people avoid my mistakes. She smiled softly. You're allowed to like being part of something. He met her gaze. So are you. The words settled between them, comfortable and true. That evening, after she left, Roger powered down the arcade but didn't rush upstairs. He sat on the stool near Dragon's Lair, listening to the cooling clicks of machines at rest. For years, he'd built this space as a single-player experience, one he controlled, contained, perfected. Now, without breaking anything, it had become something else. A cooperative campaign didn't diminish the game. It expanded it. And Roger, for the first time in a long while, was looking forward to what unlocked next. Chapter 8. Final Boss. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning and sat unread for 5 full minutes before Roger opened it. Not because he feared the contents, he already suspected what it would say, but because some systems change state the moment you acknowledge them. The mere act of opening the message would push something forward, and Roger had learned enough to recognize branching paths when he saw them. He opened it anyway. The after-school program director was polite, enthusiastic, and disarmingly straightforward. The pilot workshop Roger and Claire had planned, introductory game logic, hands-on experimentation, arcade history as context, had gone over better than expected. Parents were asking if it could continue. Administrators were asking if Roger would consider formalizing it. Nothing commercial, just recurring, just commitment. Roger leaned back in his chair. There it was. The final boss didn't roar or glow or fill the screen with menace. It arrived dressed as opportunity, reasonable, flattering, consequential. It asked a simple question. Would you like to keep going? That night, Roger told Claire over takeout, eaten cross-legged on the basement floor. She listened without interrupting, chin propped on her hand, eyes steady. When he finished, she didn't rush to reassure him or tell him which answer she hoped he'd give. So, she said, what does your internal diagnostic say? He smiled faintly. High demand, high reward, elevated risk of burnout. She nodded. And emotionally? He hesitated, then answered honestly. I'm afraid that if I say yes, I won't get to retreat anymore. Not fully. And if you say no? He exhaled. I think I'll regret it. They sat in silence, Dragon's Lair idling beside them, Dirk frozen mid-heroics. Claire reached for his hand, not dramatic, not tentative, just present. You don't have to become someone else to say yes, she said. And you don't have to carry it alone. Roger turned his hand, lacing his fingers through hers. The gesture felt natural in a way that surprised him. Would you still want to be part of it? He asked quietly. Even if I'm inconsistent sometimes? She smiled. Roger, I run on organized chaos. I can work with inconsistent. His laugh escaped before he could stop it. They didn't decide that night, not formally. They talked logistics instead. Scope, boundaries, exit ramps if it stopped feeling right. It felt less like a leap and more like designing something thoughtfully, together. 2 days later, Roger replied to the email. I'm interested. Let's talk structure. The meeting was scheduled. The path confirmed. That evening, Roger stood alone in the basement after Claire left, neon lights washing the space in familiar color. Everything was here, the machines, the tools, the comfort he'd built piece by piece. None of it felt threatened. If anything, it felt reinforced. He powered up Dragon's Lair and watched the opening sequence play through. When the dragon finally appeared, massive and roaring, Roger didn't flinch. He raised the controller. He'd done this before, and this time he knew he wasn't playing solo anymore. Chapter 9, New Game Plus. The funny thing about beating the final boss was how quietly the world resumed afterward. There was no fanfare on Monday morning. No status update waiting on Roger's phone. No sudden sense of completion washing over him as he poured his coffee and scanned his work calendar. The release meeting went exactly as expected. His code passed review. A Jira ticket closed with a neat green checkmark. Life, apparently, did not pause to acknowledge personal milestones. And yet, downstairs, the arcade felt different. Not transformed, Roger would have noticed that immediately, but lived in. like a space that had learned it no longer needed to brace against intrusion. The machines hummed when powered on, patient and solid. Dragon's Lair booted without hesitation, its familiar opening music filling the room. Roger didn't play. Instead, he moved to the workbench and began assembling something new. A compact controller prototype Evan had sketched weeks earlier. It wasn't perfect. That was the point. By midweek, planning meetings with the after-school program settled into a manageable cadence. No expansion beyond what he'd agreed to. Claire ran interference when expectations threatened to sprawl. Roger built curriculum the way he built systems, modular, flexible, humane. They worked well together. Better than well. On Thursday evening, Claire came over carrying nothing but herself. No tote bag. No notes. She leaned against the doorway, watching Roger explain a logic puzzle to Evan with deliberate patience. When Evan finally packed up and headed home, Claire descended the stairs slowly, letting the neon lights wash over her like greeting an old friend. "You're good at this," she said again. Roger smiled. "So are you." They sat on the couch, closer now, knees brushing comfortably. No urgency. No countdown ticking in the background. "You know," Claire said, "this is what I thought the tournament would lead to. Not bigger events. Just connection." Roger considered that. "I thought it would disrupt everything." "And it did," she said. "Just not destructively." He reached for her hand, fully this time. When she leaned in, the kiss was unhurried, certain, unencumbered by doubt or expectation. It felt like pressing the right button at the right moment. Later, after dinner and quiet conversation, Claire stood at the bottom of the stairs. "I should go," she said. "Stay," Roger said. Not reflexively, not fearfully, just honestly. She smiled. "Okay." That night, lying awake, Roger thought about the systems he'd trusted for so long, the boundaries he'd believed necessary, the comfort of retreating into spaces he could fully control. Those things still mattered, but now they didn't have to stand alone. Weeks turned into a rhythm. Workshops succeeded. Evan thrived. The arcade hosted learning sessions, not spectacles. Roger's indie project resurfaced, not as an escape, but as part of a fuller life. One evening, Roger powered up Dragon's Lair again. This time, Claire watched from the couch, amused. "I never beat this game as a kid," she said. "Most people didn't," Roger replied. "It wasn't designed to be beaten easily." He played through cleanly, finally reaching the ending screen. When the credits rolled, the game offered a familiar prompt. "New game plus?" Roger glanced at Claire, then selected yes. The arcade lights pulsed gently, unchanged yet renewed. Roger leaned back, content. Turns out, starting over didn't mean losing progress. It meant you kept everything you'd learned. And this time, you didn't have to play alone.